Entering the Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by DraftKings 2022 NFL Draft. Team needs, skill positions, and what teams are actually going to do to try to help us out fantasy football-wise. We'll tackle this from all angles. Reminder to everyone out there, smash the like button to the episode. In the comment section, give me your predictions for the 3 skill position players to go first in this draft. So we know there's going to be a lot of edge rushers, a lot of pass rushers, a lot of offensive linemen. The 3 skill guys you think are going to go first. Reminder to sub to Mayo Media Network as well, and rate and review the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. May as well sub while you're over there as well. If you're looking for an USFL optimizer to play daily fantasy or to bet on, head on over to runthesims.com. The USFL projections, package, and optimizer is all available right now. I actually won money last week on DraftKings in USFL. If I can win money doing something, you know it's a good product. So runthesims.com/Mayo, get that 10% off. Jeff Ratcliffe is on the line right now. Sirius XM Fantasy, FTN Network. You too, sir, are doing USFL projections. How fun was that week 1?
You know, the beauty to doing USFL projections in week 1, it was truly an impossible test, so there was no way to fail. But, you know, like you, I won. I was up about $50, which, you know, for a lot of people is like, oh, $50, look at this guy. No, $50 is awesome. I'm happy. You can't go broke making a profit. So I thought it was okay. It was a decent start to the league, and I'm excited for week 2, man.
I was both kicking, after Sunday, because the game got pushed into Monday, I looked at it. I was up like $3 or $4 grand up near the top of the contest. And they were like, well, they might cancel the slate. They might get rid of the final game. And I was like, well, I have the most player minutes remaining on of the highest teams left. Like of the people that only had 3 or 2 players gone, I had the best path to first place. And I was like, oh man, if Tampa Bay can just put up points here, I'm going to win. And they put up 17 points and I ended up just going way down in money because of the Monday game. So that was no fun. But all I did was optimize my lineups, built my stacks, and everything was good to go over at Run the Sims. Let's talk NFL, though, because no one gives a shit about the USFL, as it turns out. We got the draft coming up. If you missed my chat with Emery Hunt about prospect grades, deeper guys in the draft, small schools, go check that out on Mayo Media Network in the Pat Mayo Experience feed. That came out on Tuesday. Emery is the best. He has written a 1,000 player profile guide, which just seems insane to me writing that much. But hey, he's done it. So you can go check that out and check out the show where he talks through everyone. Mock draft coming up next week with Thor Nystrom and Ray Garvin, like we've run back the past 2 years. So that's going to be fun. So I need you to fill me in here, Jeff. Especially from a fantasy perspective, who are the teams that stand to benefit the most from a fantasy perspective through the draft, both either at quarterback, running back, receiver, whatever it might be? Let's start with the quarterbacks then, because Carolina kind of sticks out. Detroit, maybe. Who do you see going quarterback first here?
Well, you mentioned Detroit. I just think that's the fascinating story of the draft for me because, all right, Jacksonville could surprise us a little bit, right? They could go offensive lineman. We've heard Doug Peterson really wants to go there. The safe move is to go edge, likely Aiden Hutchinson, but we'll see what happens there. That's not going to really reshape the draft, though. But Detroit could do one of really 3 things. They could go edge, which is the safe play, as I said. I don't think anybody would look at them sideways if they drafted Kyle Hamilton as safety at number 2 overall. This is a big boy, versatile, can do so many things for you on the defensive side of the ball. He's a very talented player out of Notre Dame, but quarterback is in play. So what they do there will have a ripple effect. It may not reshape the entire first round, but it will reshape the first half of the first round. The first 16 or so picks are going to have a ripple effect there. So yes, Detroit could be looking there. Now, in my first mock draft, which came out last week, I'm actually going to do another one next week for FTNFantasy.com on Monday. And I'm going to do it very differently. That's the point of the exercise, right? I'm not trying to be right. I'm trying to think through who are first round talents and who do these teams need, right? I'm not going to get it right. What do I look like? Josh Norris here? I'm not going to get many right at all. But that's beside the point. I had them going quarterback at 32. So Detroit almost bookends the first round, picking at 2 and 32. I had them taking Matt Corral there, give you a year more of Jared Goff. Then maybe Corral could be the quarterback of the future. So you have them. You mentioned Carolina as well, picking at 6. David Tepper has made it abundantly clear since he has taken over as the owner of this team that he wants himself a franchise quarterback. They have swung and missed on a couple of key trades here. And, well, there is one swing for the fences play. Of course, that's Malik Willis. Is he ready to start in year 1? I don't think he is. I mean, he may have to get forced out there. The unfortunate thing is if you are Carolina right now, you have Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold. That's not a bridge.
Yeah,
it's not a bridge.
It's just not good. It's bad. It's actively bad. That means if you're starting Sam Darnold, all that tells me, and you don't select a quarterback, is that you're playing for the number 1 pick next year.
Yeah, and I don't like to do the next year thing. Pat, we've been doing this for a long time. How many times have you heard, oh, but next year, but next year's running backs are so much better. Oh, but next year's quarterbacks are so much better. We don't know what next year really looks like. This time last year, who was the de facto number 1 overall pick? It was Spencer freaking Rattler for a lot of people who obviously flamed out. Now, he may be in the mix next year in next year's draft class if this year goes well for him as he transferred, but we don't know. A year before, Joe Burrow was the arguably greatest college quarterback of all time in a single season. He wasn't even on the radar. Zach Wilson, a year before he becomes the number 2 overall pick, coming out of his second to last season at BYU, he wasn't on the radar. So we really don't know. And yeah, I don't like that playing for next year thing. And you're right. If Sammy Darnold is your guy, yeah, you're in some trouble. The good news, though, for Carolina, or maybe bad news, I don't know. There's a couple teams that are going to be pretty bad this year. At least on paper, that's how it looks heading into this year's draft.
All right, well, let's try to figure out the players that may select a quarterback in the first round. I'm thinking the Lions, the Panthers. Would you put the Giants on the table at all with their 2 picks? Do you think that's plausible?
Not given their new general manager. Yeah. Now, their new general manager was there when Josh Allen was selected at Buffalo, but there isn't a Josh Allen in this year's class. Joe Shane has made it abundantly clear they want to build this team now from the ground up through the draft, and they have 2 great opportunities to do so. Now, one thing, though, that I think could be interesting, Pat, being that they do have 2 picks in the top 10, what can you get in exchange for one of those picks if there is a team that wants to make a move up the board, especially if you're positioned at 5? Malik Willis doesn't go at 2, let's say. He's not going to very likely go at 3 to the Texans. Doubt he goes at 4 to the Jets. If you're a team that wants him, if you're Pittsburgh, I don't know, a team in need of a quarterback who is further down the draft order, and you want to leapfrog, you can package a first-round pick and a future whatever to get up there. Probably is going to have to be a first-round pick. The Giants could still then have 2 first-round picks this year and accumulate capital. I mean, that is a scenario. I'm not saying that's likely to happen. I'm not putting on the tinfoil hat and claiming any kind of conspiracy or anything like that. But it is a possibility. But I just don't see the Giants going that route this year. I think we could very likely see them address offensive line. They could have one of the 2 big offensive tackles fall to them at 5. We could see Ike Ekwonu fall down there. We could see Evan Neal fall down there. Either one of them. They offer very different skill sets, but either one of them, fine. And then edge is obviously a big priority for them as well. And you mentioned it. It's going to be an edge-heavy early part of the first round. And there are edge guys who certainly could be there with either one of their picks that they could take. So I don't think the Giants are in play for a quarterback.
I wouldn't think so either. So you mentioned the draft trade back. How much do you think that would be predicated on, is it better for the Giants and their trade capital at number 5 that Malik Willis goes number 2 to the Lions, or that no quarterback is selected? Because if one of them goes, as we've seen in the past, then all of a sudden it triggers something and teams are like, oh shit, we need a quarterback right now. And then they start leaping and reaching for these quarterbacks that probably shouldn't go where they're supposed to go. Do you see that's more likely to happen, or no quarterbacks come off the board and you're sitting there at 5 and then anyone can kind of trade up? And who do you think the teams would be to trade up for a quarterback? I was thinking, it wouldn't take much for the Falcons to get up to number 5 because really you're only just passing the Panthers. That's a pretty logical deal for the Giants. And then I would guess the Saints and or Steelers. I doubt the Steelers, but the Saints seem like they want to be aggressive in getting a quarterback. Like they've been in on all of these like innuendo and rumors. They haven't got anyone, obviously, but if Willis was going to be their guy and he was still available at 5, I could see them theoretically trying to package something together to move up.
There's a lot of chatter connecting the Saints to Kenny Pickett, though, which
is he the small?
I actually think
is Pickett the small hand guy? Yeah, good for him.
Very small.
Oh, good,
hands.
good. I mean, when you can draft John Beck 2.0, you got to do it.
Hey, live on air on SiriusXM, visual bits, by the way, on radio, Pat. Great stuff. Great stuff. But I did measure the hand. I took out the tape measure and everything. I'm over 9 inches, baby. 9.25 inches right there. Look at that. But yeah, he's got smaller hands. It's not completely unprecedented, but it doesn't bode especially well. Michael Vick had 8.5-inch hands, but he was the exception, not the rule. They've been connected to him. I don't think Malik Willis is necessarily the right pathway for them, but you mentioned teams who could trade up or who might be interested in, who need a quarterback. Well, Seattle is a glaring team that needs a quarterback. They are now picking at 9. That could be in play. I don't believe anything these guys have to say whatsoever, especially after the Russell Wilson, we're never going to trade him or whatever the language was. So they have Drew Lock. They love Drew Lock, sure. And Pete Carroll loves everything until he doesn't and makes a move. They're in play. Washington, how much can you really believe in Carson Wentz at this point? You would have to figure they could be in play as well. And then you mentioned, Pittsburgh is the other obvious name. Last year, Pittsburgh, the ownership came out. Rooney himself came out and said, we have to do a better job of running the football. And lo and behold, they draft a running back in the first round. That was the easiest pick to make, and that was like the only mock draft pick I get right. So easy, Najee Harris. They have said numerous times that they are going to bring in competition at quarterback. I am reading that they are going to draft now. Does that mean draft on day 1? Does that mean stay with their pick and hope that like somebody like Desmond Ridder is there, or maybe Matt Corral? Or does that mean even day 2 you're drafting the likes of Carson Strong or somebody like that? I'm not quite sure, but I am not buying that Mitchell Trubisky is just in the driver's seat for that job.
The Texans have myriad options. I doubt they go anywhere at 3 at quarterback, but they pick again at number 13. I think it would be dependent on them if their guy, whoever they rate as the best quarterback, was just somehow still on the board for them. Because I don't think I think they're fine rolling out Davis Mills at this point, and just to see where, hey, we're still rebuilding. I don't think one quarterback is changing, the trajectory of the franchise this year. Maybe it's better to solidify everything, build up the defense, build up the offensive line, build up some more of these skill position players, and then insert a quarterback into it next year, whether it's through a free agent signing or through the draft. But if things break the right way and no quarterbacks go, they're sitting there at 13. You have to think that they might be on board with taking someone. And then the Vikings at 12. Like, Kirk Cousins is not going to be there forever. This is probably the last year at Kirk, right?
Well, he did re-sign that extension.
But how long how long is that guaranteed money for, though? Isn't it just through next year
and then
they
an
can cut bait?
NFL contract. Yeah, it's one of those. It's an NFL contract. So I mean, in theory, I guess if you're a new regime, you don't believe in Kellen Mond because it is a new regime. They did not select Kellen Mond, so who knows what they even think of him. I would have to say that's a possibility. I floated that out there today, actually, on my SiriusXM show as a possibility, but maybe a little bit more of a long shot. It is funny. You mentioned the Texans. So the Texans, when you list team needs, it'll be like, oh, this team needs help at wide receiver or linebacker or edge. And then like you look at the Texans, it's like everything, like literally everything. They could use it. It doesn't matter. And of course, in my mock draft, I went about as boring as I possibly could, and I gave them 2 offensive linemen with the 3rd overall pick and 13th overall pick. We could see that. We could see them address defense. Heck, we could see them at 13 go with somebody like Devin Lloyd, a very, very impressive linebacker. Off-ball linebackers tend to not be the priority in drafts, like top 10 type guys, but he is a very talented player, has the size, has the sideline to sideline, has the ability to play in coverage. Such a fun player, but that's about the range. I have mocked at 15 to the Philadelphia Eagles, but he could come off the board there. We really don't know what they're doing, honestly, because there's so many different avenues. But one would have to think, yes, if this is a draft where quarterback slide, which is a distinct possibility. And they do ultimately have Malik Willis as their top player on their board at 13, and he's there. I mean, you'd be foolish to not take him. I just do think, though, that they're going to give Davis Mills the benefit of the doubt this year. Hope that he turns into like a Garoppolo, a Kirk Cousins, like that type of a capable starting quarterback for you. And then you build around him on a cheap rookie contract. That's the way to rebuild a roster if that's the pathway they follow.
What's going on with Kyler Murray in the Cardinals? That's going to be fine, right?
Well, all right. So let's review what could possibly happen with Kyler Murray, because I think there are 4 pathways, right? One pathway, he says, screw you all, I'm going to play baseball in the A's organization. That could happen. He holds out. That is number 2. That could happen. Number 3, he's traded. Or number 4, he just plays through the season. Even if there's no contract, he plays through the season. The likelihood of the first 2 happening are extremely thin. I don't think he says, screw you all, I'm going to play baseball. And I really highly doubt, given the current CBA, that he is going to hold out, because these players lose a lot of money by holding out. Even if it's a short period of time, they get fined pretty dramatically once camp starts. He could miss all the voluntary stuff he wants, but once those fines start racking up, there's a reason why Aaron Rodgers showed up last year. I think that's going to be now the new kind of holdout, where they're not holding out in camp. They're just going to play through it. But anyway, could he be traded? Well, certainly. He absolutely could. If somebody is willing to pony up the right price, then he could be traded. I just don't think there's a strong chance of that. So with Kyler Murray, I think he's not going to be happy, but he's going to play. I think he's going to show up if they don't get this contract done. He's going to show up, he's going to play, and he's going to, Kyler his way through the season. And then next year is going to be even more explosive in the offseason. But as of right now, I think that's the most likely path for Kyler.
What is the issue with Kyler and the Cardinals anyway? I still haven't been able to figure that out. It's just been weird, cryptic Instagram posts. His agent ended up writing a weird letter for him that I don't know how that person is still an agent at this point, because that didn't seem to help anyone. What's the issue?
It was all in caps, too. That was the bizarre thing about it. Maturity, I think, is ultimately what this comes down to. It's very passive aggressive to remove your any reference to your team on your social media. Like that doesn't sound like the most mature approach to this.
I don't know about that, because it seems to be working. And I think that's the path that everyone is heading down right now, that at least it gives you, whether you mean it or not, just removing your team from your social media, that now gets talked about as story. So if you're looking for a new contract extension, for more money, or to be traded because you absolutely want out, it does seem to create some leverage because people start talking about it. And if you're the agents, I get why that makes sense. It's the follow-up stuff that makes no sense to me. And I don't know what Kyler wants. Like, is he angling for the extension right now?
Yes, he is. I mean,
Okay.
When the market is reset and you're talking now $50 million is a viable number on an annual basis, yes, that's what he's looking for. Now, you mentioned it draws attention. It certainly does, but some of that attention can be quite negative. Deebo Samuel has received death threats. He has received countless racial slurs thrown at him. This is just stupid. Absolutely stupid. Anybody out there who's doing this, I mean, find something better with your time. And what is he trying to do? Deebo Samuel's trying to get paid. He's trying to make more money in this job because he feels like he's worth more money. And the same people who are leveling these offensive slurs towards him, threatening him, those are the same people 5 minutes later are going to turn around and be like, yeah, I don't get paid enough in my job. I need a raise. That's all he's trying to do, so it doesn't always have a positive effect when you do remove any likeness of your team there on social media. So I guess it's a double-edged sword. Kyler certainly got attention. There's no doubt about it. But I do think that there's a lot that can be accomplished behind closed doors. Pat, you and I both know this. In our world, that happens all the time behind closed doors, and a lot can be accomplished. So I don't know. I think maybe it's just me being an old man and not understanding that generation, but that's kind of where I am with it.
I completely understand it, because you're trying to find any avenue to create leverage in, whether it's a contract negotiation, whether it's in the trade market. You're just trying to get more for yourself. I completely get it. It was just the follow-up stuff with Kyler that made no sense to me. So you have Deebo. This has happened with A.J. Brown now as well. And I get it for receivers. You talk about potentially $50 million in the quarterback market for a free agent or a long-term signing. Look at these wide receiver contracts. Now, they're just, everyone just, they want a high-end receiver and they want to pay him billions of dollars. And I think we can credit Christian Kirk's agent for all of this. We're like, well, if Christian Kirk is worth this much, what the hell is Tyreek Hill worth? What the hell is Devontae Adams worth? And I think that Deebo is seeing this and A.J. Brown is seeing this. I think that they both, listen, we have like a 10-hour window of when we're recording this and this show comes out and hits live. So Deebo could be traded. Deebo could be signed. A.J. Brown could be signed. He could be traded. I don't know. I don't see either of those guys going anywhere.
Well, not this year. They're still on their rookie deals. So, and again, if anybody is afraid of them holding out, neither one of those guys are making, they're making a lot of money for normal human beings, but compared to wide receivers, we're talking base salaries of under $4 million, close to $4 million. They're not going to sacrifice any of that by holding out. So I wouldn't worry there. They're posturing now. They're trying to get something done now. Or, well, in Deebo's case, maybe not, because he doesn't seem like he wants to play for the 49ers beyond this year. A.J. Brown is posturing, trying to get something done. I wouldn't worry too much there, that ultimately things are going to happen. I also do think that the common person needs to understand, while Tyreek Hill's number annually is $30 million, it is not $30 million. The last year of that contract is it's a $50 million salary cap hit. It's a $43 million base salary that none of which is guaranteed. This is not baseball. These contracts are not guaranteed. And technically speaking, Miami has an out with Tyreek Hill in 2024. This year, no. Next year, no. Next year's $27 million guaranteed almost. But they could get out of this contract pretty easily, pretty quickly. So the numbers are misleading. And I can understand how general managers are banging their heads off the wall seeing these contracts right now, and then having that class of wide receivers who are now going into their fourth year. So many of those guys are now stars in the league, and they're going to get paid one way or another. But it's an unenviable position to be in for their general managers.
So let's play the game of Deebo has requested the trade. That's been made official at this point. If you are one of the teams that, and you could project 7 teams to pick a wide receiver in the draft. You could go with the Vikings at 12 if you really wanted to. I doubt that's a great situation because now they got to pay Justin Jefferson very soon. And if you take Deebo on, you're going to have to pay him as well. Then all your money is tied up into 3 guys, plus the money that you paid Dalvin Cook. The rest of your roster is probably not going to be very good. The Ravens actually do make a lot of sense, I think, for something like this. Do you think that they would give up 14 in a heartbeat to get Deebo and just to bring him in rather than draft a guy? Or is that rookie contract now, if you're just so sure this guy is going to be good, so valuable because of the market that you wouldn't do it?
I don't think 14 is enough.
Okay.
If you add up the pick values for Tyreek Hill and for Devontae Adams, that was a 12th round or 12th overall pick. So I think it would have to be 14 plus in order to get him. Or something that would equate. I would have to imagine it would be a top 10 pick to get him.
So the Jets, the Commanders,
the Commanders are very interested in a wide receiver. They've brought in Chris Olave. They brought in Drake London. They pick right in a prime spot where they could take a receiver there. Or yes, bringing in Deebo would make sense.
Do you think that Deebo would just say, no, I do not want to play for the Jets like every other person has done?
Or the Commanders. Or the Commanders. I think that could happen, but does he, as far as I know, does not have that say. It's not a Russell Wilson say where, you can actually dictate where you go.
Would the Falcons be interested in a receiver, or are they just basically punting the year, trying to use this as a bit of a rebuild year and try to figure out what we're doing to get to the next level next year? Because it feels like they've been the same team for so long, just with the Matt Ryan steady presence. And obviously he's in Indianapolis now, but are they really going to roll out Marcus Mariota and what the hell is it? Zacchaeus is their number 1 receiver?
Well, they are absolutely kidding themselves at wide receiver, which is unfortunate. They obviously have a great pass-catching tight end in Kyle Pitts, and that can be a foundation, but you do at least need somebody else. They didn't even re-signing Russell Gage would have been good for them, and of course he jumped ship for their divisional rival in Tampa. 8 is a spot where you could take a wide receiver. 8 is a spot where Garrett Wilson could come off the board. I do think he is going to be the first receiver taken, just given the athletic traits that he has. You're in a predicament. I mean, the Calvin Ridley saga, you're in a predicament. Julio Jones, you anchored your franchise with, he's gone. You're in a big predicament. So yes, that or some kind of trade, but I just don't know. I mean, I guess the 8th overall pick in theory would get that done. I don't know if they do it. I think they would be more likely to use it. And I did mock Garrett Wilson to them at 8.
It would be interesting if they did trade for Deebo to have, I mean, did Cordero Patterson re-sign with them, or is he still a free agent?
He re-signed with them.
All right, so you'd have Cordero and Deebo. You could run it pretty, like, for a team that's not going to be good. I think that's one interesting strategy if you're not just intentionally trying to lose games. Like, you have Ross as your owner, and he's just like, yeah, why don't we not win games? How does that sound? I'll give you some cash for it. If you're a bad team, I think that running an offense with those two players and the lesser talent around it, I think is at least unique enough to kind of work. A lot like the year one when the Ravens brought in Lamar Jackson. They were like, this is the offense that we're running. Kind of like what the Broncos did with Tebow that year too. It's like, we need to gear an offense that could feasibly work with this player. And now you have two dynamic players, two big play players that I don't know if they necessarily work interchangeably because they would do a lot of similar things, but you could also create a lot of misdirection, never know where the ball is going. Mariota still has a bit of quicks left in him that if you made him like a running option as well, line those two guys up in the backfield, Mariota and shotgun, at least it's a different look.
And I think you highlight the key word, mismatch. This is what the league is going towards, more positionless players. Not every team is fully embracing that, but we're seeing it on both sides of the football. We saw an off-ball linebacker out of Penn State who ended up being one of the best edge rushers in the league last year in his rookie season. More positionless players. So you have a positionless running back / wide receiver who finally somebody figured out how to use in Cordero Patterson. If you introduce Deebo, a wide back, as what Kyle Shanahan was calling him, then you also have Kyle Pitts, who in some ways is a positionless tight end. Like it drives me nuts when people are like, he's a wide receiver or he's a tight end in name only or whatever they want to say. I mean, he did line up in line. He's not Mike Gesicki, where he's not, he's like allergic to lining up in line. He's not Jimmy Graham in the peak of his career, but he is a dynamic weapon, the likes of which we really haven't seen at tight end in the way that he plays, especially outside the numbers. So you're creating a mismatch with him. Like if you have Kyle Pitts in the slot, how do you cover that tight end? You can't put a linebacker on him. He's going to destroy the linebacker with speed, right? You can't put a slot corner on him. He's way bigger than the slot corner. And I think even safeties in a lot of instances really are going to struggle against him. So you have a mismatch there. I think that could be really fun. Now, Arthur Smith has had his go with Marcus Mariota in the past, but I really, again, I got to give him a lot of credit for untapping Cordero Patterson. Can he finally untap Marcus Mariota? I mean, he didn't the first go round. Maybe this is different with him calling the shots as the head coach. Give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm not overly optimistic on Atlanta. You're right. They're rebuilding after basically a generation of stability with Matt Ryan. But, Deebo would be interesting. I don't know if that's the most likely spot for him, though.
If you, of these guys that are potentially available at receiver, whether they're actually available or not, we don't know. So you have A.J. Brown, you have Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf's name just gets thrown into this mix as well. I don't know why Seattle would get rid of him unless it was a completely true blow-up. I just don't feel like they're ever going to do that with Pete Carroll. They'll try to patch something together to try to have an air of respectability to them, whether that means, they just re-signed Geno Smith, whether you start him, whether you start Drew Lock, whether you draft a quarterback. Seattle doesn't strike me as a franchise until they get rid of Carroll that will go through a rebuild. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but the dude's an old man. I don't think he wants to oversee that. A lot like what the Patriots did last year, and it kind of worked for the Patriots. They were a lot better than I think that almost anyone kind of projected them to be. Maybe Seattle can do that as well. Probably not, but we'll see. So Metcalf is potentially out there. So Metcalf, Deebo, and Brown. Which one, if you were a team, if let's say all the draft capital was exactly the same, what you had to give up was exactly the same, who would you target?
And I guess to a lesser extent, Terry McLaurin is also in that conversation.
Is he really?
I think we could include him in that conversation.
Why
I think he's the least likely.
God's name would Washington get rid of him?
Well, I don't know if Washington always makes the smartest moves. Like, if you knew you could just get Matt Ryan, why would you get
Carson Wentz?
Carson Wentz? It was a panic move after Russell Wilson. I don't know. Of those three, yeah, each one's going to offer something slightly different. And I don't know if there is necessarily a right answer to the question. I think, what do you have existing? If you're a team like Philadelphia, does it make more sense to bring in Deebo Samuel or a bigger guy like A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf? I think it makes more sense to bring in those guys because in theory you have Devontae Smith who can do a bunch of what he does for the team. Now pair that up with this monster downfield threat on the other side, that becomes very interesting. If you are, well, you mentioned Baltimore. If you're a team like Baltimore, yeah, putting Deebo and a guy who can give you 5 to 10 carries a game in addition to 5 to 10 catches a game, with, depending on the game, putting him back there, a guy who can excel in the short and intermediate for Lamar, that makes sense. So I do think it is based on the team because all three of them are so interesting. DK, freak of nature. You remember when he was coming into the league, Pat, and everybody's like, all he does is run 9 routes. Okay, cool. Let him run 9 routes. I'm fine with that. AJ Brown, I guess the only knock I have for him is he just got to stay healthy. To a lesser extent, we could say that about Deebo, but man, coming off of last year, wouldn't it be great? It would be really annoying for fantasy purposes, but if he somehow landed in Miami as well, so they could have Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle all in the field at the same time, good luck defending that. That doesn't happen, but I just, me in my mind creating these fun scenarios, that would be wild.
I was just trying to think, if it is McLaurin, I think McLaurin would be the best trade target if he was actually available in that circumstance. It just feels to me like he would be undervalued compared to these three guys, just based on name value alone and sort of the season that he had last year, which wasn't necessarily his fault. He just had absolute goobers throwing him the ball. That wasn't even close to him. So that's going to be tough. You have all these targets that you see, and you're like, okay. Then you see the catches compared to it, and then you have to really dig in like, well, how many of those were actually catchable? Turns out not many. So there is a chance that McLaurin is just simply undervalued in the market compared to these three. I mean, that's who I would go after if he was actually available.
Yeah, he's one where you can kind of fit him in anywhere. Like if you wanted to pair him with Devontae Smith, I think you could. If you wanted to throw him in the Ravens offense, honestly, I think you could. I think you can do so many different things with him. Again, probably the least likely of that bunch. Although, DK Metcalf, the Seahawks have made this point that they're not going to do anything here. I do think if they draft a quarterback, then yeah, they're going to stick to their word. But I don't want to completely rule out a rebuild, Pat. And I actually don't even want to rule out the fact that the rebuild has begun. Because you think about what the Seahawks were built around on both sides of the football. Offensively, for the last decade-ish, they've been built around Russell Wilson. Defensively, for the last decade-ish, they've been built around Bobby Wagner. Neither one of those guys is on this team anymore. So, and that was by design that those guys are gone. So the rebuild is kind of technically here, but as you mentioned, like Belichick shows us, I mean, you can get, if you get the right kid in there at quarterback and you have the right surrounding cast and they buy in on what you want to do, you can still be very competitive in the NFL.
Looking at the teams without first-round picks, how do you think that they navigate through all this? Like you have the Browns, obviously they sign Amari Cooper, they get Deshaun Watson. When do you think that we see Deshaun Watson in a Browns uniform? Do you think it's going to be week 1 or it'll be week 10? Do you think he'll have to sit out a season? This all seems like it's still in flux.
It is. I mean, legally, at least we know criminally, we have the final answer to our question. We know what's going to happen there. We do not know entirely what's going to happen civilly with all the civil suits, et cetera, and that continues to evolve by the day. The league has done its due diligence. The league, I do think we're going to have an answer to the question before camp opens up. So that means, hey, it could be today, in the next, but before this even airs, this answer could come out. But I don't think that's likely before the draft. I think it'll be like a random Friday in June, and it's like Deshaun Watson suspended for. I think the most likely is 8 games. I think the second most likely would be 6 games reduced to 4. If they go 4 initially, there's going to be a massive backlash to the league. We know that. If they go a full season, I just don't think that's really a viable avenue for them. given, and I know that it's not quite the same thing, but he has already been essentially out for an entire year. He was exempt. Even though he wasn't on commissioner's exempt list, he was out for an entire season already, not suspended, but I just don't think a full season is in the cards. So I think the traditional half of a season, it's not really a half a season anymore because we have 17 games, but the 8-game would make the most sense, and that's what I think is ultimately going to happen.
Well, it's tough too because although he sat out the entire year and didn't play football, he still paid the entire year. And if he was on
commissioner's exempt is paid as well.
Is it?
So
like
yes, paid leave.
Oh boy, that
yeah.
Does it count towards the cap?
Last year would have, yes. That was why the Texans had to move when they did, because his number was increasing so dramatically this year that if you were going to do the same thing, because Watson was not going to play for them. He was going to show up in the facility and do everything that he had to do to keep getting paid, but he was never going to play for the Texans again. And the Texans just cooperated last year because technically the league could have put him on commissioner's exempt. They decided not to because it was 6 and 1, half a dozen the other ultimately for the league.
Do you think that any good teams, like win now teams, might target one of these receivers, even if they'll probably want to sign him to an extension, obviously, but potentially let them walk before it all clicks in, like the Packers, the Chiefs, the Bills, those types of teams that are maybe they're not even necessarily one player away. They might be there as it is anyway. The Chargers are another one that could potentially get on board with this. Do you see one of these elite guys going to one of those teams?
Well, when I thought of Deebo Samuel and pairing him up with Aaron Rodgers, that is really interesting because when you think of what Deebo Samuel can do, I mean, you could say in a lot of ways Randall Cobb is maybe the rough draft of that, where Deebo is what you hand in. Deebo is that on the perfect version of that in a lot of ways. I could see that making sense. And for Deebo, if he went there, sure, you could get extended, or like you said, then you hit free agency. Can you imagine a player like him hitting free agency, which I doubt would ever happen at this point in his career? That would break the bank. We just don't see good players this young hit free agency, but it would make sense to go there. You'd have an instant opportunity for targets. You get to play with one of the best quarterbacks of all time in a system that is very similar to the system you just played in. There's that connection. Shanahan, LaFleur, all those guys have those connections. I could see that. I could definitely see that for a team in that win now window.
Well, the Packers have 22 and 28 in the first round. The Chiefs have 29 and 30. It feels like those two picks together might be enough to prize someone. You might have to throw in something else along the way. But if you're the 49ers, you're a team that is pretty good. Maybe having 2 back-end first-round players is exactly what you need to solidify the depleted units of your team where you really need to shore things up. But what does the 49ers offense look like without Deebo? He seemed like he was such an integral part of what they did in throwing that misdirection in. I don't think that Brandon Ayuk is going to go into that role. Do they try to find someone to do that as well, or do they go back to a more traditional offense? Or does Trey Lance just become a super running quarterback and he ends up starting the season?
Well, there's a lot of pieces of all of what you just said that I think make sense, right? I don't think that Kyle Shanahan's ever going to have a traditional offense because he's an innovator. He's a guy who's going to always push the boundaries, and that's part of why they were doing what they were doing with Deebo Samuel last year. You have him on the field, and it's challenging. It's really challenging to defend that. You have some of the other weapons there that you have, like Ayuk could do some of that, but I could also see them let's say if they did trade and they got some of those picks back at the back end of the first round, there are players who present interesting skill sets who could do certain, like Sky Moore, for example. He's not Deebo Samuel necessarily, but he's a unique player. He's very fast. He can play in the slot. He can do a lot of different things, more so than just like a traditional X receiver. So I could see them via the draft on day 1 or perhaps on day 2, filling some of that if they just did decide to move on from him.
Is there anything to potentially the Niners having a Deebo type player, using him in a certain style, and Kyle Shanahan being so good at coming up with these schemes and utilizing these players that the 49ers could get away with trading him? Deebo goes to another team. Well, he's good. He doesn't have the same impact. Could they be that sort of factory of, hey, let me showcase this player and look how great he is? They flip him for a bunch of stuff, and it just turns out they're not buying fool's gold, but they're not getting what they thought they got because they don't get Kyle Shanahan along with it.
Well, it depends on who the team is, right? If you have one of these guys who is from that school of thought, and I keep going back to Miami. I don't think he goes there, but I do know there's a very special connection between Deebo Samuel and Mike McDaniel. They talked before the season started last year. Mike McDaniel said, do what I'm asking you to do, and you will be, the best offensive player in the league, and I'll be a head coach next year. Check. And I mean, when you think about offensive weapon, Deebo is the offensive weapon in the NFL right now, as far as I'm concerned. And he's not quite a wide receiver in that regard, but he is just so incredibly dynamic. So both of those boxes are checked. If he went to a coach out of that coaching tree, and that would include the Jets, by the way, because Matt LaFleur's brother is the offensive coordinator there. There is a connection, obviously, with Bob Saleh.
No one wants to play for the Jets. No one.
Nobody does, unfortunately. I mean, you would have to have a scenario where they're going to use him in the same way. You make a point. One thing I will say, though, if you're watching this and you have fantasy in mind, Deebo Samuel's role in the San Francisco offense is actually detrimental for fantasy purposes.
Oh, yeah.
There were games where he carried the ball 10, 11 times. Say he runs for 6.5 yards per carry. You get 60, 70 rushing yards, scores a rushing touchdown, then catches one ball for 12 yards. Like, that's not a wide receiver 1 week. That's a wide receiver 2 week, which is fine. The world needs wide receiver 2s as well. But if we're viewing him as a top 6 fantasy wideout, there's going to be a number of weeks in that sort of role where we're going to be disappointed. So maybe that wouldn't be the worst for fantasy if he's not used that way, if he does, in fact, go elsewhere.
Is there anything to giving him running back eligibility in fantasy? Like we saw
with the challenge with that is that the volume isn't enough.
Ty Montgomery got it that year.
Yeah, I mean, I would. That's tricky. It's tricky. I don't know what I want there. To be honest with you, he should have both eligibilities, like Cordero Patterson has both eligibilities. I guess in theory, if you're talking about Ty Montgomery, then that was a good thing. Right?
Yes.
You could use a guy who's playing running back at wide receiver who is not viewed as an elite option. Here, we're using this wide receiver who we do view as an elite option as a running back, we're using him as a wide receiver. He's being used as a running back, and then that puts a cap on his elite ceiling because we need him to catch 6, 7, 8 balls. We need him to average 10-plus yards per catch. We need him to be in the mix for touchdowns as a receiver here and there to rack up those PPR points. So it's a little bit of a different comparison when you think of, like, nobody had any optimism for Ty Montgomery heading into that season. And he was kind of thrown into that. Thus, the number at that time, remember, they had the number designations, and he was, 88 playing running back, which was always a bizarre look. But we didn't have that mindset for him that we do for Deebo.
I'm just trying to think, do you think the consensus will be, in terms of fantasy football drafts when they're upcoming, is that initially he'll go very high. People will make this case against him if this role, at least we project, stays the same. He ends up becoming a good value. But is he a player where, how can I phrase this properly? Even if he's not used, he's so efficient with what he does and scores so often. Would there be a point where, he gets talked up as a top 6 receiver. He's probably not a top 6 receiver based on volume. He gets dropped down to like wide receiver 12, 13, something like that. But it just turns out he is a top 5 receiver because he scores so much and he generates so many big plays that maybe that's something you can just overlook. As long as he's touching the ball regardless, 12 times a game, it's all going to work out.
It's really difficult to maintain that level of efficiency over the long term. That's the one challenge that I run into. I mean, yes, he's awesome, and he had a special year. I would say in some ways a historically good year, but they don't call it historically good because it happens every year. So that's where I would be a little nervous. And to be clear, this is my sentiment on him. And I know other people may have very similar mindset, but I do think the masses are still going to be high enough on him that, yes, he's going to be a middle round in redraft leagues. He'll be a middle second round pick. He'll be the 6th or 5th or 7th wide receiver off the board, somewhere in that range. And when those bad weeks come, not bad in that he's terrible, bad in that he's wide receiver 22, wide receiver 23, a lot of the folks out there are going to complain. And it always drives me nuts when you complain, but this is what you signed up for, right? So just if you're drafting him, just know that if there are weeks, if he's still in San Francisco, there are weeks that he runs the ball 12 times and only catches 1 or 2 passes, that's just going to happen. That's part of the ride with Deebo.
I want to talk about Miami for a second. Just they've done so much in the offseason, but they have this big Tua potential problem at quarterback. How does this season unfold to you? Do they bring in the right guy to take advantage of what Tua is good at, hide at what he is bad at? Was Tua bad anyway? Is Tua bad? Is Tua actually good? And he just didn't have the weapons to be utilized properly? It's all very confusing to me because you can make a pretty good narrative case that the coaching staff that they had in place, the scheme that they were in, hell, they had 2 offensive coordinators at one point last year. They had an offensive coordinator the year before that who was brought in to be a Ryan Fitzpatrick whisperer and then didn't change the playbook for a brand new quarterback. I think it shows you really the huge gap between a franchise like the Ravens and how they're able to adapt on the fly to the personnel they have, to Miami, who's like, let's try this, which means nothing. We're not going to do anything. So does a new regime, new position players, a revamped offensive line, a revamped running back core, this is all brought in to see if it can work with Tua, obviously. Will it work with Tua, though?
For a number of years here, and this was like the first year where this did not happen, we had Alabama wide receivers coming into the NFL, and who was the comp? Tyreek Hill. Who was the comp for Jalen Waddle? Tyreek Hill. Who was the quarterback who had success with those receivers? Tua Tagovailoa. This is not a kid who's going to throw above the rim to, Devontae Parker, who he never seemed to get on the same page with. This is not a guy who's going to throw way down the field and, have the bucket accuracy of somebody like Russell Wilson. He is a player who is incredibly accurate, low air yards, but will put the ball in a position where the receiver can catch in stride and then do what they do in space. You have Jalen Waddle now. Obviously, we saw that worked last year. And then you get the archetype. You don't get, he plays like Tyreek Hill. You get freaking Tyreek Hill in there. I think it actually is a good thing for Tua. Now, I'm not going to be overly bullish. I don't like to put the cart in front of the horse ever with what I do in this analysis for the NFL. But I do think if you're going to put the right pieces in place, if you're going to buy the groceries to cook a fine meal here with Tua Tagovailoa, you bought a truffle or whatever, you bought the finest caviar, whatever. I don't like either of those, but anything that you like, the best possible ingredient, you got it in Tyreek Hill for Tua. So I do buy in on that. The run game, they're going to try and replicate what Kyle Shanahan does with the outside zone stuff. Bring in Raheem Mostert, who's been really good at that, but also very injury prone. And then Chase Edmonds, who kind of fits that player profile. The San Francisco running backs tend to be a little undersized, tend to be a little lightweight, but also tend to be very explosive and can make some plays. So as of right now, I'm going to give Mike McDaniel the benefit of the doubt. And I do think this is going to work because they got the right pieces in place. And yes, I think it will work for Tua. He's just not a super high ceiling quarterback. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he can be very efficient with these guys in this offense.
Does it strike you as Tua is a quarterback that people either really want to be good for reasons? Because I fall into that camp. I want him to be good. I have no idea why I want him to be good, but I do. And then you have the complete polar opposite to that too, where people hate Tua. They think that he's absolute trash and there's no way that he could ever get better. There seems to be no middle ground on, could he just be like a version of Jimmy Garoppolo? And that's probably what his destiny is, isn't it?
I mean, when you think of the offense, yes, that could very well be. But you remind me of the movie Swingers. So you were calling Tua Tagovailoa a PG-13 guy who we really hope makes it. Yeah, maybe he is one of those guys. Maybe he is. As far as I'm concerned, what he has done so far in his career has not been terrible. This has not been Ben DiNucci by any stretch. Now, granted, it wasn't maybe some of the stuff that we saw when he was at Alabama, but he was also surrounded by an absolute fleet of players all over the place with that roster. Just such an impressive, he was an all-star team. And yet, you look at what he was successful at there, he was a low A-dot quarterback. I know a lot of people think of the throw when he came in to save the day in the national championship game to Devontae Smith early in both of their careers at Alabama. But a lot of it was dink and dunk and let these kids do what they do best. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I do actually think this works for them.
Are they the most confusing fantasy team going into the year?
That's a good question.
Because running, can you even draft one of these running backs? They're going to have good games. You're never going to know when or which one it's going to be. So that's a big X for me through those guys. What's the percentile likelihood that Tyreek Hill was a product of Patrick Mahomes?
Well, that's usually the flow chart in the NFL. The quarterback makes the receiver, not the other way around. But Tyreek Hill is also a very special player as well. So I think that part of it, yes, the big play upside, that all of that from Tyreek Hill, like the downfield stuff, that is not going to be in existence here. That was one of the narratives. I actually wrote an article basically, and I love these types of articles. Makes me feel so strong. I was like, why you're wrong about Tyreek Hill, I think was the title, something like that. But anyway, he's not a high ADOT guy. He's not a air yards guy. I know that was the mindset, but that was really that 2018 season, which was Patrick Mahomes unleashed on the league, and the league saying, oh my God, we don't know what to do with this guy. Well, the league catches up, and Hill has since become a much more mid-range or low ADOT guy. When you're talking about a guy who's under 11 yards, air yards per target, that's a lower ADOT guy. And that actually fits. Again, like the whole narrative fits very well. So, yes, some of the downfield stuff, when you have a guy like Mahomes who can, spin it like he does, yes, that's not going to be there with Tua. But I still think if Tua can do as advertised, put the ball in a spot where Tyreek Hill is catching it in stride and in space, we know how dynamic, we know how fast he is, that he can still be successful. I still have him as a top 10 fantasy option. I'm not really worried there. I did move him down, but I still think he's a wide receiver one, no doubt about it.
Do we think that, what would you put the percentage at that Tyreek Hill outscores Jalen Waddle? 70-30, 60-40, 55-45? Because there's clearly a connection with Waddle and Tua already.
Yeah, there is. I would probably say it's about 65-35, somewhere in that range. Strong possibility that he does outscore him. I don't want to completely rule Jalen Waddle out. I have Jalen Waddle right now at 23. And that's pretty bullish, but he's coming off of one of the better rookie seasons that we've seen out of wide receivers. I mean, I know we're spoiled recently because we have Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but still what Waddle did last year was pretty special. So yes, the connection exists. And then also benefiting when you have a guy like Tyreek Hill on the field, there is that ripple effect of, okay, the defense has to know where this guy is. And sometimes they might be they may forget about me just a little bit where I can benefit too.
Do you think Davante Adams was a product of Aaron Rodgers?
No.
That's a real fantasy conundrum this year, right? Like, if he's as good as he's always been, he's like a top 5 pick. If that was a lot Aaron Rodgers and the drop from Rodgers to Carr can't sustain itself, especially from the touchdown front, which was such a huge part of Davante Adams' fantasy impact and just the way that the Packers used him in the red zone. He was the red zone option. That's not going to be the case more than likely in Vegas now, especially with Carr not being able to make the same sort of adjustments or throws at the line in quick succession as Aaron Rodgers was able to do. Like, is he even a top 10? Like, what would be like the median outcome for him? Because obviously the upside, we know what it is. The downside is like he might not even be a top 20 receiver.
I would find that hard to believe, though, because given the contract, given the situation, and given the connection between these two, let's not forget, was Davante Adams the product of Derek Carr at the college level? These two were absolutely prolific over the course of 2 seasons at Fresno State. The numbers are jaw-dropping. Now, granted, Fresno State, not Alabama, but still jaw-dropping numbers, and they have that viable connection between the two of them. But more or less, let's say, what's a median number, or what's a midpoint in terms of target expectation? Is it 135? Is it 140? Because he could end the season and have 180 targets. He could also have 110 targets. But if we have that midpoint, if he has 140 targets, it's going to be very difficult for him to not be a top 12 option. If he has more than that, it's going to be very difficult for him to not be, a top 8 option. And honestly, I think that him being force-fed in that offense, which I do expect to happen, is it only moves him down just slightly in rankings. I would have had him a very close second to Cooper Kupp if he stayed in Green Bay. I right now have him at 4 overall among wide receivers, not overall, among wide receivers, which to me it puts him in the conversation in the second round of fantasy football drafts. And I'm not really overly concerned. I think he's going to be just fine. So partially, yes. Early on, he struggled with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers helped push him to become an elite level route runner, an elite level wide receiver, and in my opinion, a surefire Hall of Fame wide receiver as well. And now Derek Carr is going to get to reap the benefits of that a little bit.
I'm just trying to think. 140 seems like a lot because they're still going to use Hunter Renfrow. They're still going to use Darren Waller. How do you anticipate the Josh McDaniels offense looking, contrasting it with what we've seen from Gruden and others the past few years?
Yeah, none of that spider 2Y banana. Well, that's tricky. We know what McDaniels has done in New England, but that also is not necessarily a 100% consistent thing in that New England has been so prone to adapt. You have a year where, you have all those years with Tom Brady, and we know what that offense looked like. It was Tom Brady in a lot of instances not having an outside receiver threat, not having a Devontae Adams on the field, and Tom Brady leaning on, Julian Edelman for a good chunk of that second stay that McDaniels was there after his time with Denver. You also then saw Josh McDaniels completely adapt the offense to Cam Newton. And Cam Newton had a bizarro season where he barely throws any touchdowns, but ran the ball pretty well, and then you have a rookie quarterback come in there and we saw what they were able to do to adapt to him. So I honestly think that McDaniels is going to be really pliable, flexible, and adapt to the personnel. And when you have one of the best wide receivers of his generation on the field, you're going to use that receiver. Hunter Renfrow will get his, but don't expect anything like what we saw last year. And yes, Darren Waller presents some interesting mismatches. This is a team that's going to throw the ball 600 plus times, no doubt about it. They're not going to throw the ball 500 times. So there's enough meat on the bone where Adams can get his, Waller can get his. I think probably the biggest question is whether or not they use Josh Jacobs as a 3-down back. We saw Gruden so reluctant to do that. Then Gruden was out, and boom. Oh, by the way, yeah, Josh Jacobs, remember at Alabama when he caught the football? Yeah, he can still do that, and he's still not bad at doing that. So, and then it all of a sudden made sense. If they do that as well, I just think there's enough meat on the bone. I've done the projections already. In fact, the projections will come out in the initial batch next week, right in advance of the draft, over at ftnfantasy.com. And then I'll actually do live projection updates during the draft as skill position players get picked.
Are those going to be free for the people to consume, or is that behind the old paywall?
Well, the whole list will be behind the paywall. You can, of course, use the promo code RATPACK to get yourself 20% off over there. I will tweet some of them out, though, for sure. Like, especially the big names. Like when Breece Hall gets picked, you better believe I'm going to tweet out the projection for him. Maybe that's on day one to Buffalo at 25. Maybe we don't see a running back selected at all on day one.
Do you have any draft props that you've looked at that you like just before we get out of here? Just something you can throw out that I can go bet on right now and try to win some money?
Ooh, that's tricky.
So no, pass. You don't have it ready. Don't worry about it. I don't want you making one up on the
fly. I have looked at them for the mock draft, but there's not much that I really like right now. I mean,
who goes one? Then?
I guess.
Who goes number one?
Well, Hutchinson, but there's no value there. The last I saw was minus 280. So it's like easy, but you're not going to make any money off of it.
I mean, if you got a lot of money, you can make some money off.
Yeah, you could like that mattress guy or whatever. Betting on the Super Bowl.
Yeah, Mattress Mac. Mattress Mac should be betting on Hutchinson number one. Are you
$5 million?
Do you think that is a lock to happen at number one? I don't think it is either.
So you're actually getting very good odds right now. I believe it's over 10-1 on each of them, on Ike Ekwonu and Evan Neal at 1. Of those two, I would think Evan Neal makes more sense because he is the better pass. He's a monster, enormous human being, better pass blocker of the two. Ekwonu is a better run blocker, but they're both very good tackles. Neither one of them is a generational top overall type guy. But Doug Peterson has gone on record, talking about offensive line. There have been rumblings out there. There's been plenty of reports that it's not a secret that he wants to go offense with the first pick overall. And, so if you're getting 10 plus 1,000, I think plus 12, plus 14 on these guys, depending on the book that you're looking at, it's not bad to throw a few shekels at it.
Jeff Ratcliffe. You can listen to him every weekday on Sirius XM Fantasy. No idea what station that is. Which station is that?
It's Sirius XM 87.
87. There you go. So when you're in your car and you got your free trial from your new car, you can tune into Sirius XM and listen to Jeff every single day on the radio. Also find him at FTN Fantasy. What was the promo code? Rat Pack?
Rat Pack, RATPACK, 20% off right now. So use and abuse that promo code before it goes away.
Highly recommend Jeff's packages, not only for the projections and the write-ups, but everything he does over at FTN, whether it be FTN Fantasy, FTN Daily, FTN Bets. You need more Jeff Ratcliffe in your life, so go check that out. Promo code RATPACK for 20% off. If you want some USFL optimization processes and stuff to make lineups for you, runthesims.com/Mayo. We also have the NFL optimizer too for NFL season and the projections. Plus, there are F1 projections up on the site right now that are completely free as we continue to test them out. They've been very successful so far. We're hoping we can keep that rolling forward. So just go to runthesims.com/Mayo. We'll get you 10% off, but you can just log in with an email and check out the F1 projections if you want that anyway. Recommend that you check out my show with Emery Hunt as we grade the prospects. Well, by we, I mean he grades the prospects, as I don't know who any of these guys are. So I listen to him on this one. He's been very good at it. And then myself, Thor, and Ray will be doing the 6th annual Pat Mayo Experience mock draft. So we hope to see you then. That's coming out very soon. So sub to the network and the podcast to make sure you don't miss it. I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!